Hey legends, Blake here with another video, and I often see beginners struggling with planted tanks, and I think it comes down to choice more often than not. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about 9 different types of plants for beginners to avoid. Let's jump straight into the video. Okay, so when I'm talking about 9 types of beginner aquarium plants to avoid, more so I'm talking about sort of families of plants. So to give you an idea, the first one we'll get started with is non-aquatic plants commonly sold as aquatic plants. Really common one I see all the time is aluminium plant, or if you're in America, aluminum plant. There's other ones called dragon's flame, purple temple, purple waffle. But for the main part, what you want to look out for is different colors that you don't really see outside of super high-tech aquariums. So if you're in your big box store and you see a basic planted tank with basic lighting and no CO2, and you see a plant exhibiting colors like the purples of the dragon's flame or whites of the aluminium plant, then a fair chance that is a non-aquatic plant. So it always helps, especially if you're new to plants, just go give it a quick Google, chuck the label in there and see if it's going to come up as aquatic or non-aquatic. You'll save yourself a lot of dollars and a lot of heartache. Branching into that, the next one are rushes, and I often see Japanese rush, gold rush, variegated rush. If you see these sort of really hard-stalked, grassy-looking plants, then they're probably going to be marginal plants that will do well with a portion of them growing outside of the water, but fully submerged, you know, they might survive a couple of months here and there, but they're not going to be a permanent fixture, and you'll pretty much never see them grow any more than that day that you place them in your aquarium. So again, rushes, whilst it can technically be done with a huge amount of CO2 and heaps of light, especially for beginners who I'm not expecting to have that kind of setup, best to avoid them. The next one I'm going to talk about is really popular thanks to a couple of viral TikToks and YouTube videos, and that is Lucky Bamboo. I think most of us have probably seen those Zen aquariums that have been set up with the statue of Buddha in them, but realistically, if Lucky Bamboo is fully submerged, it's going to survive for a period of about 8 weeks. That said, if you do make sure that there are some leaves above the surface of the water, it is a great addition into a hang-on back filter or a tank that doesn't have a lid, something like that, so long as you do have that portion above the water. But for fully submerged applications, it's definitely not a great idea, and that aquarium that you're setting up won't be very zen at all when things start to rot away and cause a bit of an issue. Now the next one might create a bit of controversy, but I'd actually suggest that Anubias is one to avoid for the budding aquatic gardener. The reason is that Anubias are so hardy and so slow to react, whether that is in good conditions or poor conditions, that for me, Anubias don't really provide a great teaching moment for beginners to be able to figure out how to diagnose issues. An Anubias will take 6 months to die sometimes, so by the time you realize something's gone wrong, it's often too late, whereas a more fast-growing stem plant might be a better opportunity because you'll be able to react to things and watch the changes happen before your own eyes. Whereas if you increase some fertilization to an Anubias, it might take 3 or 4 months before anything even changes. So if you're going to diagnose 3 or 4 different issues, then it's going to take way too long and you will end up losing that Anubias. Next one up on the list, Marimo moss balls, and what they are is a naturally occurring ball of algae which created in tidal lakes in Japan. Well, for a while now it's actually been prohibited to harvest the true Marimo moss balls, and for over a decade now it's been illegal to import those into Australia and many other countries. So for me, the vague nature of what are sold as Marimo moss balls is definitely one to have a question mark on, even the most discerning aquarium eye. But most of the time, you're going to get synthetic materials, mosses, or Cladophora algae just formed into a ball. The best bet to find out if you have a true moss ball or not is to cut it in half, but for beginners, I'd just suggest avoiding them all at all costs. Although they are definitely cute and fuzzy, there's just too much gray area between a bad one and a good one. The next one I'd suggest avoiding for beginners are plants with incredibly soft leaves. I've said that as the category because it should be easy to identify. Now the reason I'm saying that plants with really soft leaves are one to avoid is because often those are the ones that fish are gonna pick at and destroy over time. For the most part, they're going to be a bit picky with the aquarium conditions, especially in terms of flow, fertilization, and CO2. So for me, they're just too sensitive, and I'd recommend some more broad, sturdier leafed plants like Ludwigia repens, Amazon swords, Crypts, of course, Java fern, and there's plenty of others out there. Next up, I'd avoid plants, and I know it's really tempting and often heartbreaking to hear, but I'd avoid plants with really deep red or purple coloration. I know that we all have the dreams of deep red plants in our aquariums, especially early days, but realistically, the demand on light, and as a beginner trying to balance that amount of light with CO2 and fertilization, it's just a really big task to undertake. So I'd recommend mastering some of the more available green plants rather than jumping straight into the deep end and spending all your money on red tiger lotus, Alternanthera reinecki, scarlet red, Ludwigia, red root floaters, Ludwigia rubin, and many more. There's plenty of time for that sort of thing, but just nail the basics before you start to jump into that whole balancing act. Next up, and again, I know it's really heartbreaking, but I'd say some of the very common carpeting plants are just too outside of the reach for beginners, especially when it comes to balancing the demands for light and conditions. So things like Monte Carlo, S. repens, Glossostigma, dwarf baby tears, and Blixa japonica are outside of what I would recommend for beginner hobbyists setting up their first or second planted tank. If you really want a carpeting plant, I'd suggest something like a dwarf hairgrass or a pearlweed, but those other ones listed are just best bet avoiding, again, until you nail the basics. And the last one I kind of want to sidestep, it is also a difficult carpeting plant, but I thought that it sat within a category of its own, and I just thought it was an interesting one to mention, and that was carnivorous plants. So that I'm talking about Utricularia graminifolia, or commonly known as UG, and it's actually a carpeting plant that has some really beautiful lemon lime color to it, but it's a carnivorous plant and survives mostly on crustaceans within new water, so copepods and little things like that. So with that said, obviously you need a very well established aquarium to sustain life for a carnivorous plant like that. So definitely one to avoid. But just because I'm suggesting avoiding them today, doesn't mean that you can't try all of these things a year or two into the future. So hopefully you like this video. Hopefully, although it can be hard to hear sometimes, it saves you some money in the long run, saves you some heartache in the long run, and allows you to build up that experience before sort of having the setbacks that are a little bit inevitable. If it has helped you out in any way, it always helps me out to smash like, hit subscribe, and all that fun stuff. If you've got any comments to help your fellow beginner, feel free to drop them down below. I'm sure everybody will really enjoy reading all the comments. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.